The history of Dungeons and Dragons is a long and storied one. I have not done deep, like really in-depth, detailed research on this. I know the highlights. I have a general sense of the timeline. But what I know is enough for me to realize that we've got some work to do. D&D, as everyone knows, started as a war game. It was a miniatures war game called Chainmail, I believe it was called, which was sort of expanded by Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson and their friends to encompass fantasy aspects, and they introduced the idea that you can do anything rather than just do what's in the rules. And that sort of spawned this idea of being able to play as individuals, making interesting role-playing decisions, going on adventures, and that is developed into the Dungeons and Dragons that we know today. The issue, and I feel like every video, right around the 1 to 2 minute mark, the issue is it still has its roots in wargaming. The original game was based on that, and that was sort of the genre of game that the developers of D&D had familiarity with. That was the games that they played. And can we attribute to them some level of genius because they were able to come up with the idea of a role-playing game, a whole new genre of game? Well, I don't know. Were there other role-playing games before D&D? Was D&D just the first big one? I don't know. Maybe. Maybe they came up with it entirely themselves, and so we can give them some credit for that. But at the end of the day, by modern design standards, the original D&D was not a good game. If it was published today as a brand new game, assuming it wasn't published before, people would look at it and say, well, that's garbage. We're not doing that. The standards today are just much, much higher. And so it is curious to me that Dungeons and Dragons, as a franchise, is still shackled to some really crazy ideas from the old school D&D. As editions go on, and the game is redesigned, reimagined with each new edition, there's obviously going to be some rules changes. Excuse me. So you have to have rules changes, otherwise the game remains stagnant. And it's not really a new edition, is it? So it's curious to me that certain things have been left in, chief among which is ability scores. The idea that you have one ability score that is not used, but it just generates a modifier that actually is used, is crazy to me. No one but D&D, and directly D&D inspired, like the D&D family, is the only family of RPGs that does this. And I see no benefit. Even Pathfinder has realized that's kind of dumb. Let's not do that anymore. So, cheers to Paizo. And you know that I am not in any way a Pathfinder shill. I find Pathfinder to be very middle ground. Like, it's serviceable, but not exciting. That's my view on Pathfinder. But they realized what's going on with their system. Like, this is really weird, and we're only doing it because D&D did it. So let's not do that. So that's really weird. The idea of classes having linear structure where you have set benefits at each level of the class. That's something that pretty much only D&D does. D&D and its family of games. And a few games, like there's a handful of games that are directly inspired by D&D. Like, you could say Lancer kind of does something similar with its license levels, except in that you are assumed to be sort of mixing and matching. But each license is indeed a linear progression, 1, 2, and 3. But there's just things like that in D&D that have remained more or less unchanged since the very beginning. And some of these things were not introduced at the very beginning. Some of them were introduced later, 2nd edition, 3rd edition. Excuse me. The whole idea that monsters should be built in kind of the same way that player characters are, with regards to they have ability scores that contribute to their attack rolls and their hit points, and sort of like a lot of the calculations, that verisimilitude that you have between player characters and monsters, it doesn't need to be there. 4th edition did away with that, and then it came back for 5th. In 3rd edition, it was actually even more extreme, where you literally built monsters from the ground up, level by level, like a character, including taking feats and everything. And there were monster classes for the different types of monsters. That was an insane level of verisimilitude that, at the time, I kind of saw the point of. Today, no. Would not ever do that again. So it's interesting to me that when Dungeons and Dragons advances and changes and evolves with each edition, it seems shackled to certain tropes and mechanical, like specific mechanical aspects that have seemed to come to define D&D. The existence of alignment and the whole like lawful chaos, good and evil axes, that has been carried forward to an extreme extent, far past the point of uselessness. Alignment was more or less done away with in 4th edition, and 5th edition didn't really bring it back. It kind of like carried it forward almost as is and said, yeah, alignment, it exists for sure. Do what you want with it. But I just think it's interesting that there are mechanical, and let's not mince words here. I think there are mechanical flaws with D&D. Issues that create problems or are just extremely bizarre and that no one else does today. Like, modern RPGs have pretty much done away with a lot of this stuff. But D&D still does because it always has. A lot of RPGs nowadays will be like pretty clear that you shouldn't be rolling twice for any given thing. Like, make one roll and have that be the roll. D&D and systems directly inspired by D&D, if you're going to make an attack, you're going to make an attack roll and then a damage roll, and maybe a save after that, if there's like a secondary effect, and then maybe roll some more damage. Like, poison weapon is 4 different rolls to resolve like a poisoned weapon hitting somebody, because you got to hit, then roll damage, make a save, roll more damage. A modern RPG would just have like a non-binary resolution mechanic. Non-binary resolution mechanics, they're good. And would say, like, on a partial success, you take some damage. On a full success, you take additional poison damage. And it would be a single roll. There's, like, I know some crunchier RPGs still feel the need to separate, like, attack rolls and damage rolls. But for the most part, like, most RPGs have sort of static damage where the attack roll also determines how much damage you do at, based on a certain base amount. And so it's these sorts of things. Like, I could come up with a dozen different examples, and they're all relatively small things. Like, does having separated ability scores and ability modifiers really affect that much? No, it kind of just takes up a lot of extra space on the character sheet. It doesn't really bother me. And yes, a couple of things in the system do care about the actual score. Your carrying capacity in 5th edition, your hit points in 4th edition. Like, yes, they technically do count for things. But honestly, it's very obvious that the mechanic is only there because it has always been there. And it's bizarre to me that a game like D&D gets such attention from the developers, but the developers have no courage for actually, like, exploring new territory. D&D has a lot of themes. It has themes of exploration, themes of epic fantasy, creating and exploring new worlds. But those are not the things that define D&D. The things that are defining D&D as it exists now are mechanical things. And they're mechanical things that have been around since the 70s. That's 50 years by now. You wouldn't try to recreate shot for shot a movie that you are remaking that is 50 years old. Unless you're Disney. Unless you're Disney, then you can get away with it. Or if you're Wizards of the Coast, you can get away with it, This is amongst the reasons why I say that D&D is now only popular based on brand recognition. It's not popular on its own merits. It really can't be. If 5th edition was published today by a different company, no previous brand association, it would 100% flop. People would not be willing to ignore all the problems. People would not be so gracious about it. They would not assume that, everything is for a reason. And I'm getting really ranty and tangenty right now. But that's okay. I don't mind. I haven't done this in a while. The fact that D&D is sort of married to its mechanical flaws, and that is part of its identity, is just bizarre to me. And that's why we have spell slots again. That's why spell slots came back for 5th edition, because it was part of D&D's identity. It is a very bad way to do magic. It has so many problems that have been solved 100 times by 100 different games. But it's part of D&D's identity. It's been there since the beginning, with the exception of 4th edition, of course, which is the devil system. So let's have spell slots. And then let's also actually buff spell slots compared to all previous editions, because we like freedom. And so we're going to make spells even more overpowered than they were before. It's a really upsetting state for the game to be in, but that is the state that it's in. The only other game I know of where I am aware of multiple editions and kind of mechanically what has changed between them is Legend of the Five Rings. And I know that the first 4 editions were done by AEG, and then the 5th edition of L5R was done by Fantasy Flight, which now is Edge Studios, because they're they are what Asmodee created out of, like, they pulled the RPG department out of the corpse of Fantasy Flight and made Edge Studios with it. So anyways, Fantasy Flight / Edge Studios made a completely new game. All the same themes, and that was sort of the running pattern with regards to their redoing of L5R stuff, was we're going to take the same themes as the previous games, but we are going to make them mechanically new and fresh. And occasionally you will see things being ported over, things that are sort of central to the theme of the game. For example, the 5 elements are stats that you have in the game. Like, your character has 3 fire and 2 earth, etc. Those things were ported, like that kind of stuff was ported forward. Relatively minor stuff, because they are used very differently. But like mechanically, there's not very much at all similar between L5R 4th edition and L5R 5th edition. And so it's weird to me that D&D doesn't do that. I mean, I guess it's not that weird. Like, D&D is now a big brand. You've got to protect the brand. That is the number one priority for anyone who's working on D&D. Protect the brand. Brand is first, because the brand is the most important thing. The brand makes money. And so I think that Mike Merles, who was the lead developer when 5th edition was being developed, had a lot of bad ideas, but he was a fan of old school D&D. He had a lot of bad ideas, and he ported them forward. And now that Jeremy Crawford is in control, I think Jeremy Crawford's mainly a figurehead. Like, I'm sure he does editing and writing, but I think he isn't allowed, like, even if he wanted to really fix all the problems in 5th edition, like, let's say he was actually an excellent, fantastic designer. He's not, to be clear, he is not. But let's say he was. I think he's not allowed to fix 5th edition because fixing 5th edition would involve sacrificing a lot of sacred cows. And Hasbro sees those sacred cows as being the pillars of the brand. And Jeremy Crawford would not be allowed to fix that. Because it's not broken as long as it's making money. And as long as it is seen as being the correct brand, it will continue to make money because people want to play D&D. D&D is what's on Stranger Things. D&D is what's on Critical Role. D&D is the game that their parents played. D&D is the role-playing game. Like, we're playing D&D. Oh, what kind? Like, it's like Coke now. You know, it's a brand name, but it also kind of encompasses all things that are even a little bit like it. You know, I got a new Nintendo. What kind? Oh, a PlayStation. That kind of thing. That's what D&D is now to RPGs. That's how powerful the brand is. And you can't risk that. You can't change anything about it. So D&D is, I think, doomed to repeat past failures. It is doomed to carry forward the flaws of old editions for a while yet. I've said this before, but I really hope that 1D&D / 5.5e / 5th edition, 2nd edition, I really hope that it fails. I hope it flops hard, because that is going to be the kick in the pants that Wizards of the Coast needs to realize they need to actually make a change and start innovating instead of rehashing and remixing things that we've had for a decade already. It probably won't. I'm guessing if I had to put money on it, I would say we have at least another 10 years of 5th edition after this. I think 5th edition is going to be a 20-year-old system by the time 6th edition drops. And at that time, we will see if any lessons have been learned, or if we're going to get a lot more of the same stuff. And I think it really depends on who owns the brand at the time, because if Hasbro has it, there's no way. Nothing's going to change as long as Hasbro has D&D, because D&D is this golden idol brand for them. That and Magic the Gathering.